Yeah. We'll take one. You know what? I need to answer that. This primarily, the presentation, since I don't know many of the people here, it's meant for general 65,000 view level of what a cloud and machine learning is. If there are topics that this group wants to focus a little bit more, I can tailor the presentation towards that and skip through those slides which may not be relevant. So just taking a kind of a quick kind of a survey here. So there are two things that we are going to discuss today. One is the cloud and the second thing is the machine learning. Is there a kind of a, like how many people have preference for machine learning? Can I see a raise of hands? So probably 30%, I think. So I believe rest of the people are for cloud. Is that right?
No, there's some people who are doing cloud. We need to check.
Both of them. Okay. Great. So I think thanks for the introduction, and a little bit about myself. So I founded a company by the name of Actionable Analytics. Sold it recently. It's a cloud machine learning startup. So hence probably I think by some definition I might be a little bit of an expert in this area. So I'm able to talk about it. Prior to that, worked for Amazon, Yahoo, Oracle, and so on and so forth, primarily product and software development, running teams there. And I'm very thankful for this team to kind of invite me to Canada. And it seems the weather is outside very good these days. Very surprising, but it's good. Maybe I brought the good weather here, I guess.
Well, then don't leave.
Well, if the customs doesn't stop me, I won't leave. So, without further ado, we'll get started. So, here are some of the things that people have been saying about machine learning in general. So, you will see the quotes from Microsoft, quotes from, let me read, Sun, and things along those lines. So, before we kind of get further deeper, I like to understand from what is the thought about what machine learning really is. Is anyone out here likes to kind of define it? Would like to take a shot at it? You'll get an extra, whatever this is about. Anyone? No? Go ahead.
I'm not much of an expert, but I think machine learning is about to make machine learn some patterns and some observations so that it can start to infer similar type of information from similar type of patterns.
Okay, great.
Anybody else? You have a PhD in this topic. How can you not be an expert?
I have to be
Don't raise the bar that high, people.
Yeah. So one of our friends here said, so I'll just use the friend because I won't recognize everybody's name, so please bear with me. He said that machine learning is more about finding patterns between the existing data. So that could be one of the examples. Does anybody else have any other things to add or disagree with them, or has any other thing to add in this? Like what do you think about machine learning? Any teams here using machine learning right now in their projects? Yeah. We'll not stop further, but we'll go on to the next slide. So this actually, the slide shows out the machine learning actually works with a lot of data. So the basic premise for using any kind of machine learning software is to have lots and lots of data. And the traditional way of doing data is, so we are all familiar with RDBMSs, right? We are all familiar with RDBMSs. And the way RDBMSs work is that you have something like Oracle or Teradata or things along those lines, and you do some kind of transactions using SQL. So that's the way traditionally it used to be done. Then people thought about that, transactions are not kind of good enough, and we need to do further deeper insights. We started calling it as OLAP, Online Analytical Processing, rather than Online Transaction Processing. And that's where we invented warehouses. So you have warehouses, Teradata warehouses, Oracle warehouses, things along those lines. And finally, people figured out that even that is not good enough. We need to go a further step deeper, and that's when we came into the realms of machine learning or artificial intelligence, so to speak. So this kind of diagram actually depicts that. So from a top-down perspective, you see at the surface level, which is like the technology that people use on a daily basis. It's mostly the SQL that you see on the surface, just to do some transactions, select certain queries, get the results out, and get done with that. So daily banking transactions and things along those lines would come into those areas. The more kind of shallow area which is in the middle is the OLAP processing, which is we are talking about the aggregations. We are trying to find out, which sales are higher, what sales are lower in a database, and we talked about the layer foundation. And finally, the hidden jewels that you really want to infer from the data that you are collecting is the realm of actual machine learning. So that's what we are going to focus on today's discussion. Anyone has any questions, doubts, nothing? I think diagram looks good. Okay. So here are some of the applications of machine learning. I believe maybe some of you might be building companies in some of these areas, probably. And so the actual, the y-axis that you see are the number of inputs, the number of fields, the number of inputs, the observations you require to get a good classification model. That's what it talks about here. And the x-axis is number of features or the kind of columns in your data set that you may be using, you need to require. So it talks about, high energy physics, you definitely need more number of examples to get anything of concrete importance. And same way in let's say machine vision, which is about seeing, visualizing, speaking, hearing. That's the computer vision that you see on the kind of last side, where you need more number of times. So the x-axis actually talks about the number of dimensions that you may require, and the y-axis talks about the number of observations that you require to be able to work in these different kind of fields. So it's just a kind of a area kind of show. So the most used area today in the machine learning world is marketing analytics. So basically customer segmentation, how do I show you that? So all Googles and Facebooks and Yahoos of the world are trying to click the next ad, trying to trick you guys to click into the next ad. I mean, I work for that company, so I know we use a lot of tricks so that you should click on that ad that you see, the annoying ad. So that's where mostly machine learning is being used. So moving on forward. So in machine learning, there are basically 4 classes of problems, and you can focus on one area and start focusing on those. So towards my, so they are majorly divided into supervised learning and unsupervised learning. So in supervised learning, primarily we focus on, there is a training data set we collect, where we already know what this data set contains. For instance, in our case, I'll use our example for sensing dynamics, that we have 8 sensors, and we have a humidity sensor and a temperature sensor. So in total we have 10 sensors. We are collecting the data from the nodes that we have, the nodes that kind of senses the smells, different kind of smells that we have. What we do is that we put different kind of essence, coffee essence, vanilla essence, raspberry essence, and things like that. And we try to see how those sensors respond to those kind of different smells. And we just collect that data. Okay. Once the data gets collected, we already know for raspberry smell, how did the sensors respond. For banana smell, how did the sensors respond. For raspberry smell, how did the sensors respond. So this forms our training data set for a problem known as classification. So we already know what is that we are trying to sense, and once this thing happens, how did the sensors move. We collect that data. So we run several experiments, we get thousands and thousands of those kind of observations, and we collect them into a data set, where we say each of the sensors corresponds in a different way to a different kind of smell. That becomes our training data set. So in a classification problem, this data set is very important. So if we don't have a data set prior to that, we cannot do classification. So that's what classification is, and we'll show more diagrams to go a little bit deeper into that. If you go onto the right side, we have clustering, which is unsupervised learning. And in unsupervised learning, you don't need to have a predefined data set. I can just throw you a bunch of data and ask you to figure out something inside it. But I will not tell you whether it is banana smell, or it is raspberry smell, or it is coffee. So I will not pre-label the data. It will be just raw data, and you have to uncover any kind of inference from it. So that's what the clustering is all about. So the classification is primarily where you label the data and you give it to the system, what has already occurred. And clustering is about there is no labeled data, it is just raw data, and you have to uncover any kind of inferences from that data. Regression is similar to supervised learning. The only difference here is regression deals mostly with numbers. So in classification, we are trying to identify classes. In regression, we are trying to identify numbers, so real numbers. So essentially, if I want to do like stock forecasting, right? So how the stocks have been performing in the industry in the past, I want to forecast like tomorrow will the stock go up or go down, or by how much, with how much percentage. Then I will be using something known as regression. If I have predefined classes, like I want to say define 3 classes, will the stock will be high, stock will be low, or stock will be mid, then I do it as a classification. But the moment I need specific numbers, that by how much percentage, then I use probably regression. So same procedure, same process, you need a training data set, use it, build a model, and get the results. So that's about it. On the right hand side, you also see dimensionality reduction. So essentially, when you work with very large data sets, it seems that as the number of observations, the number of rows in your database kind of grows, and if the number of columns also grows, it becomes very, very computationally intensive. So that's where the cloud kind of comes into being. So many times what happens, all the columns are not really relevant for our data. What we are trying to predict. So for instance, somebody wants to calculate if the person would be healthy or not, right? This is what we want to, let's say, predict. Maybe the person's age, the eating habits, the exercise that they do, these are good indicators to tell whether the person will be of a good health or not. But maybe, they live in Canada, or whether, they were married or not, whether these will be good indicators of whether they're, well, some people can guess that this could be a, indication of their well-being and good health, but most of the time, scientifically, it may not be proven. So even if you collect all these data different times, some data will not be very relevant. So those data items that are not very relevant for your observations, you can remove them. And for those things, you use dimensionality reduction.
Sorry. Why are you putting it under unsupervised learning? Because it can use like some information that are from label data for removing redundant data.
Yes.
That's the first question. The second is that that is a danger there of kind of overfitting the data, or let's say getting a lot of biases from the data. So it decreases the level of generalizability of it.
Right. So I think I'll ask you to keep your comment there. We'll answer it at the right point in time. But just repeating the question. So our friend mentioned here that the dimensionality reduction actually can be used also with the labels data, which is correct. And the other thing was he was talking about the overfitting of the model. So when we go further into the machine learning case, we'll describe that. If I don't answer, please hold your responsible for that. So moving on forward, so this is a general methodology for classification that we use. So from the starting, you get the business case. What is the problem that you really want to solve? So in an example that we gave was trying to figure out the health of a person, right? So to understand whether a person is healthy or not, we need to collect what the person's age is, what their eating habits is, what kind of weather they are they having any kind of allergies or any kind of things along those lines. So you collect all those kind of data. So that's your business understanding process. Do you really understand the business process? So a question could come in that if you were to really apply a machine learning, like how would you make sure that you really understand the business? There are 3 components to understand the business. The first component is you have to have one domain expert. So the moment we talk about health, we need somebody who is like a doctor, who can really tell what are some of the features that we can extract from this person's health background that will help us understand to calculate what the person's health would be. So you need a domain expert. Second thing comes along is you need to have a person who can actually program them. So you need a hacker or a software engineer who can actually go ahead and do the code. And last but not the least, just coding in Java, Python, Scala, etc., won't do the purpose. You need somebody to understand statistics, the math behind it. So machine learning is a complex field that kind of overlaps between domain knowledge, the mathematical or the statistical knowledge, and then the programming knowledge. So that's why it is very specialized field that people have to use all 3 of them together. So you start with the business understanding. It leads you into collecting the relevant data I talked about. So you collect the relevant data and then you do certain data preparation. Because some data could be text data, which is kind of unstructured. Some data could be numerical data, which could be very structured. And the other data could be semi-structured. You could have like XML files which may have substructures inside them and things along those lines. So that's the data preparation stage. So once you have understood the business, you figure out what the data we need to collect, then you do the data preparation, and finally, once you have done all those things, you start building a model. This becomes your main machine learning model, wherein you apply different machine learning algorithms, and there you figure out about whether your model is overfitting, underfitting, whether it is performing well or not. Those all challenges happen during the modeling phase. So when you are doing the modeling, how you evaluate them is through the evaluation phase, where you check whether this model is any good or not. So for instance, we built a model wherein we were trying to sense, banana, etc. But many times it was giving us a raspberry. So it is not classifying it correctly. So that's what we understand during the evaluation process. So we will see what kind of misclassification it is doing, and we can feed back this data back to the model, so that next time when it sees the similar thing, it should classify it correctly. So that's why you see this kind of round process going on. So machine learning process never stops. So this keeps on kind of happening again and again and again. So even after the deployment is when you actually put it into the production and the customer starts using your system. That's what the deployment is. This shows that even from the deployment, you will still go ahead and get the model again, because you can have some kind of observations in the deployment that things did not work as you thought of, and you can provide that feedback back to the modeling, and again it can give you the new model. So that kind of is a repeated kind of a cyclic process. Go ahead.
For a start, do you think it would be better to build everything from scratch, or to leverage some of the services that are in the market, such as Watson or Amazon, etc.?
Yes, you also had a question.
Yes, I'm wondering how much of current technological status has replaced humans on each of those stages.
Okay, great. So I'll just repeat both the questions. One was, can we automate this process and use something which is already available outside rather than building everything from scratch? And the second question was that how many human intervention is required and what things are kind of automated. So these were the two questions. So very good questions here. So yes, we can use a lot of things that are available in the market. I'll share a list of things that are already available in the end of the slide, but just for the answer's sake, you could use some cloud technologies such as Azure ML. You could use AWS, so Amazon ML. You can use Google Predict. These are some of the things on the cloud. Then there are a lot of open source, Weka, Mahout. These are also some things you can use on an open source way. And from a human being perspective, actually the business understanding, unfortunately, computers have not arrived at a stage where they can do the business understanding, no matter whatever business intelligence and other kind of tools that you can use. So you need human beings there. Domain understanding. So there is something known as IBM Watson that kind of encapsulates a lot of encyclopedia data and the web data. And if you ask certain questions in that particular domain, it will answer them correctly. But does it replace domain knowledge? I doubt it. So when you are building a machine learning model, like we are playing out with sensors and chemicals right now, and I don't believe any one of us is a chemist by degree or by experience. So there will be some learning curve for us, maybe a longer, to really get the real things that really impact the way chemicals respond and capture those characteristics. So a human being who is a domain expert is very much required. A domain expert can be a business expert as well, who understand the overall problem and market, but you definitely need them. And programming to a certain extent can be automated using tools such as Azure Machine Learning or Weka or Mahout and things like that, but you still need a programmer to understand those systems. Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, scientists are claiming that and showing that actually the person, a human, being involved in human-centric machine learning, that is in this case maybe more in the business understanding, can be replaced by machine help of big data. And this is being shown.
The business understanding?
Yes.
For instance,
like with the deep learning, for instance, understanding market, advertisement analysis, or a lot of different fields. So are being now developed to replace human for different factors when machines.
So I think, yeah, go ahead.
Well, Watson beat everybody at Jeopardy, right?
Yeah.
So at the domain expert at being, trivia, Watson won.
Right.
But
It's a
you
good
still need
idea.
somebody to build Watson.
That's
You're just kicking the project
Yeah,
upstream.
yeah, so I think these are very valid points, and Watson did, but you need some person to build how Watson has to be built. So it actually technically did not replace the domain expert. So if you see, and on the business understanding also, I think you are referring business understanding from the perspective of so marketing analytics, business analytics, we use machine learning, but there are actually data scientists who build those models.
That's true. I mean, machine is not conscious yet.
Yes, yes, yes. So you still need the,
You need business understanding in the organization because you need to nudge the machine learning algorithm in a particular direction that fits your business. It's not just understanding the business, it's also making it do what you want.
Yeah.
Right? Like so somebody has to sit there at Yahoo and says, what I want is more click-through on these kind of ads. Make it so. Right? It's literally like the instruction giving set of like, right? Because there's not, I mean, you can optimize all sorts of stuff, but you can actually make money.
I think what the caught this question is that that is a very generic term, and the terminology that we have in
Yes.
business.
yeah, probably. So, did you have a question? Yeah.
I don't know if you can relate it, but you're saying about evaluation.
Yes.
But if you say it doesn't work, then it leads back to
Yes.
business understanding. I was wondering, like,
How
I don't know, like, yeah, exactly, like, how it say it's not working properly, how do you?
Yeah, I'll show some metrics. Yeah, I have some slides already. Yes, absolutely. So this is what I like. So I think people are still awake. They are not slept after eating food, which is good. Okay. So I think one of the things that I also mentioned, and our friend also mentioned, sorry, I don't remember your name. So Muji. Okay, Muji said. So business understanding is, so there are two areas. So one is lot of people use machine learning in business analysis. That doesn't mean that takes away the fact of business understanding. So the people define specifically what are KPIs that we need to focus on to get those kind of metrics. So that's what the business understanding here is. You can use it for business software. The traditional term of a lot of this analytics was business intelligence. Cognos, Informatica, and all the micro-strategy people used to use it, and it used to be called as business intelligence like 10, 15 years back at least they used to call it that way. Nowadays they call it as analytics. Yeah. So this is a kind of a workflow how a machine learning algorithm really works. So you have a training data set, you do feature extraction, you train a classifier, and then you finally get an output as a final classifier. So that's the kind of a workflow, the training workflow. And I think the validation workflow will answer like what you just recently asked. So again, this is your data set. After getting the business understanding, what are the key data points we need to collect? I get that. Feature extraction is just a sub-process. Sometimes the data by itself may not be directly used. So you need to do some kind of transformations to the data. So that's what feature extraction refers here. And then you apply algorithm. And that's what we call it as classifier. It gives you a kind of a model that is a trained classifier that you get. So in this whole case, we're calling it as a classifier. If we were using regression, we will still call it as a classifier, but it will be a regression analysis. So the validation process, so rather than a training data, you use a test data. So these two data are separate, mutually exclusive. We should never use the training data in the test data. Does anyone know why we should not be using training data into the test data? Anyone?
Introduce bias.
Introduce bias, okay. Any other thoughts? Why we should not use the training data into the test data?
Because the machine has already seen that.
Absolutely. So because the machine has already seen that, then it will be just a database lookup, table lookup. So if data already was there, I can always predict that thing. There is no prediction involved in that, right? Prediction is when I have not seen that thing earlier. So that's why you use a different thing. So essentially, again, training data set, goes through it, does some pre-processing, you make it go through trained classifier, and output it gives you a confusion matrix. The confusion matrix actually is nothing but, I'll show you what it is. Basically, go back. I'll go back to the, so basically the confusion matrix is nothing but what was the actual result and what the predicted result is. Is there any kind of a difference between the two? That's what the confusion matrix is. That the actual result was this, but you predicted something else, and we just plotted out. So different models, so when we say evaluation, we see how are the different models performing. Whichever gives us the best result, we choose that model for our deployment. Yeah.
Who chooses the model? Is it the computer that's choosing the best model itself, or is the person in there saying this guy gave us the best results?
So you can do both. So if your computer is capable of evaluating multiple models simultaneously, and you give it the KPI. So there are multiple KPIs that so there are two things that you generally optimize for in any kind of machine learning system. One is false positive rates and the other is false negative rates. You can make further things like sensitivity, accuracy, precision, recall, so on and so forth, but at a very elementary level, is the false positive that you want to minimize or is it the false negative that you want to minimize? Given that you cannot minimize both of them, it's like orthogonally opposite to each other. So based upon that, you can choose a model. But if you ask a computer to choose, so you can build multiple models simultaneously and ask the computer to choose, so then you can tell them that I am more interested in minimizing false positive or I am more interested in minimizing the false positive. So that way, either a computer or a person can use it.
And this is where basic judgment comes in.
Absolutely, yeah. There are a bunch of other factors also, like sometimes root mean square error is less or more, kappa statistic is more or less. So that's where you need person who really understand math and statistics to really make sense of, okay, which is more important for my area. And again, it will change from classified algorithm to algorithm, business problem to business problem. Like it's just so many things are there that will help you determine that. So here are a bunch of algorithms, classification algorithms that people may generally use. SVM neural networks, Bayesian networks, K nearest neighbors, etc., so on and so forth. There are certain algorithms, class of algorithms that seem to work better in one setting than others. But again, unless you test it, you won't never know. So that's the kind of crux that you have all these different algorithms which are kind of available. But again, so for instance, I'll throw some anecdotes here. But again, don't hold me responsible if your algorithm, your system doesn't work by using what Arpit said in this presentation. This is just based upon my historical work at my previous companies. There it seemed to have worked. So SVM is rather very quick, gives you very good results on a very diverse data set which has multiple number of features. That means the dimensionality is really, really good. SVM seems to have worked very well in that, both on text and numerical data. So that was my understanding based on my examples. And this is for working for e-commerce, advertising tech, those kind of industries. May not work in healthcare or because I have never worked in that area. Another thing is, we also work with random forests. So the randomized forests seem to have worked very good with numerical data with very small data sets. So if you have data sets like which are like less than like few MBs, etc., random forest used to do the job really quickly, right? So that's where we saw this thing. Did I mention decision trees? Yeah, posted decision trees. So decision trees are much more easier to interpret for a human being. So decision trees, like if we have studied data structures, like tree data structures in our computer science courses, it has the roots and it has two kind of nodes, the binary decision tree, I'm going to say, and it keeps on going further. So if you were to say like why an algorithm gave me a wrong answer, and if you want to debug your code, or like why let me do this kind of an answer, decision tree seems to kind of be very helpful there because you can logically draw the diagram and see it. And most of the other kind of are so complicated that even if you get the algorithm, and even you there is no pictorial way of depicting like how internally it is actually working. So it's very difficult to debug your if you get a wrong result, like why it really happened that way. So again, each of these systems and stochastic gradient descent, which you see in the last, works very good with very large unstructured text-based data. So we have seen it work with hundreds of GBs of data, text free flow text such as comments posted on Facebook, user-generated comment on Yelp, LinkedIn, etc. Stochastic gradient descent seems to have worked for us, may not work for you, but I'm just talking about for me or for at my previous status. So those are some of the examples. Again, you choose which is best for you. Always advise test, try, only then you can choose which is the best.
And some actually people believe that SVM is the ultimate classifier because with the choose of the right kernel, it can have a great estimation of all other classifiers. So that's why you're saying that this is the best. The SVM is the best because the kernel can be changed.
Change to anything else. Yeah, I think what was it?
Pardon? Emoji.
Emoji, yeah. So Modi mentioned that in SVM you can change the internal kernel and kind of keep replacing by any one of them, so it kind of becomes the best. That's also one way of interpretation. These are more about that. These are the different types of things that are kind of available. So moving on to next. So this is in general, like you see, it's a binary kind of a classifier here. In the binary classifier, this is a pictorial representation of it. But nowadays the classifiers that we use generally are multi-level classifiers. We're trying to classify multiple things, not just two things. Yes or no, so it's just a pictorially representing. And the classifier does the following thing. If there is a good class separation, you can easily see the green dots are below, and we can, if we draw a kind of a plane in between, it kind of separates the two classes. It's just a very simple kind of a binary way of understanding what a classifier is actually doing. So anything comes below this line, it will classify it as green. Anything above, it will classify it as red. And of course, if anything comes right on the line or within that, you see there is some kind of a region, it will get confused. It won't go. That's where things become misclassified. So in a two-dimensional plane. So that's what the evaluation metric is, I think, to your question. This is the evaluation. So essentially, this is your actual and this is your predictions, like what predictions you are making. And based upon how many times you get true positive, false positive, false negative, and true negative, it kind of tells you the actual result and the predicted results. Are they matching or not? Based upon that, you get all these figures, and you can optimize based upon accuracy, error, precision, recall. Like these are a bunch of another metrics that you can optimize. Again, for different people, it depends what they really want to optimize. These are not exhaustive list of things, but these are just some of them. You can still do multiple things, harmonic means and things like that. You can still do that. Moving on to further, so this is again a pictorial representation of how a classifier is built. So you have a data, you build a classifier with a training set, you get a validation set. Here you get predictions, that is what you're saying, plus, minus, false. So positive, negative kind of results, and the final evaluation you say positive, negative, positive, negative. These are some, publicly available, tools to use them. So these are more kind of officially available paid tools. These are more kind of open source tools towards the right. So we talked about, and these are kind of more newer additions: Amazon Machine Learning, Azure ML, and Google Predict. And SAS has been there forever. IBM SPSS has been forever. MATLAB has been also there forever, and things like that. And for open source people who don't want to pay anything, just can use several of them. Again, Becca and Mahout are kind of, because they are more kind of big data, especially Mahout is based on Hadoop. So a lot of people who already have an infrastructure where they use Hadoop tend to use Mahout. And Becca is kind of you can use without Hadoop. There is no need for that. And a lot of people use R and Python interchangeably because they have a lot of functions that are already available for machine learning. So these are some of the tools. Now we are moving on to the cloud part of things. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them right now. No questions? Okay. So this probably you guys are already aware of. These are some of the services that we use on a daily basis, which are kind of posted off of cloud. We'll just skim through some of the various things and how kind of machine learning fits into the cloud. So these are some of the common characteristics of a cloud. So cloud is kind of mostly pay as you go. So you don't spend capex expenditure. Everything is on the opex, in the sense that you only pay for something that you use, like a utility. Like you use electricity in your homes, but you only pay for what you use. There is no kind of fixed thing that you have to pay. So that's the model that cloud kind of provides us. Secondly, it's anywhere and everywhere. So as long as you have an internet connection, you can connect to any cloud. You don't have to physically have it with you, and that's what another facility cloud provides. Secondly, there are a lot of facilities that a company such as Amazon or Microsoft or Google, who provide these cloud services, may have very big infrastructures which you yourself, when you're starting up a new startup, may not be able to procure, right? So that's also a kind of a trade-off that kind of cloud gives. And then it gives you kind of a fallback mechanism whereby you can kind of switch from one to another. That means if you have services in the US, you can have a data center in Europe, in Australia, and other places. So if your customers are spread across over the world, you can distribute the load accordingly. So that's also something a cloud provides. So a couple of standard items. If there are anything that I can help answer, I'm happy to help. Just in the interest of time, I'll try to move it a little bit faster. So these are different, models of cloud services. So infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So bottom, as you can see, is the infrastructure as a service. The middle layer is the platform, and the top layer is the software as a service. So primarily, infrastructure has got to do with 4 things. Primarily, compute, storage, network, and server. So compute is actually your processors, the processing power that you get. Intel, AMD, that processor, that's the compute. Storage is wherever you store your system. So in Amazon case it will be S3, in Azure case it will be cloud storage and things along those lines. Network is the networking, actually how you access the network, how the nodes are connected between themselves. And finally the memory in which it kind of runs, the server by itself. So all the services that they provide is considered as infrastructure as a service. Nowadays, the databases that you get or load balancing that you get, they also consider them as infrastructure services. The second layer, if you go, is the platform as a service. So in platform as a service, they not only give you the basic infrastructure, but they'll also put, let's say, an operating system on top of that. We'll give you some, let's say, some APIs also with that. Maybe they will install some kind of frameworks also on that, like Node.js, or maybe R will be already there, or things along those lines. Those are platform as a service. So you don't have to worry about, okay, how much is my networking infrastructure, how much is my, cloud storage and things like that. You all are getting just paid for that service that you get from that particular platform. Finally, if you move on to the top layer, it is the end user applications, and that's what we have used most of the time. So when you use Dropbox, it's a software as a service. Even though it is a storage, it may look like infrastructure, but it is actually at the consumer layer software. We all have used Google Gmail or Google applications or Google Docs or things like that. That's also at the software as a service layer. People work in more kind of enterprise setups might have used CRM systems from Salesforce. This is also software as a service. A primary distinction, if you see in all these 3 areas, is that you have to be much more closer to the code than you work with infrastructure as a service. If you don't want to deal with the nitty-gritties of the storage and compute and network, etc., and you want something already framework there so that you can start your application development, then you go for the platform layer. If you are completely a business user where you don't have to work with any coding, etc., you just want to use it as a user, you go for the software as a service layer. That's the primary kind of distinction between all the different layers. Moving on forward. So if you see, these are, so again, just explain the software as a service. These are some of the TurboTax and Drupal and Google, etc. These are anywhere meeting and things like that which you may have used. These are some of the software as a services that we kind of use. And typically the email, any kind of Yahoo, Google, Hotmail, whatever you are using. So cloud computing services, if you see, as I talked about, the infrastructure is mainly focused on storage and hosting and this. Whereas the applications are focused on those areas. So pretty much it just shows it in a different way. But it's essentially what I just talked about a little bit earlier. This is a typical cloud architecture when you kind of work with. So whenever you're building the applications, so now the choice is yours. Do you want to forget about anything like this and just work directly with the base underlying infrastructure as if you are building your first company, so you are procuring your own servers, routers and all those things. This is at that level. But then you said, no, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to have a network admin, a system admin, a database admin. I want somebody else to do that for me. But meanwhile, I also want that some basic framework should be there. Maybe .NET should be installed on my system. Maybe, a Linux framework should be installed. Or maybe I'm doing a web development. I need to have Node.js and everything kind of up and running. Then you go for platform as a service. You can see several of these business services, etc. are already available. And if you say no, I want everything automated. I want to do my taxing. So I just use the TurboTax or QuickBooks or things like that. Then you go for software as a service. You could typically build that yourself, but the choice is like at what level of interaction you need to have with the cloud. That's it. I think this is the end. This was the last slide. Thank you.